but we were also certain that we'd have just a couple weeks of shutdown and then we could get to it. But there was, of course, delay. And so our small group leaders bravely went forward in a virtual world this summer. And we got such good input and questions and energy from that process in those small groups. People really enjoyed being in small groups. Those reports were dispersed and talked about in our first summit. And we had a number of people present for that. And out of that first summit, we developed 4 working groups. You might notice today that some of the themes coming from each group overlap and emerge. And that's an exciting thing as well. I'd like to thank our working group leaders. A few of them are visible on the screen. And a few, we don't have everyone presenting today. So if they're not presenting, they're not visible. But I'd like to introduce just virtually, Christine Winters, who pulled us all together on technology this morning and continues to let people in when they show up. Greg Carlson, who is our consultant from Convergence and will speak in a few minutes. Pastor Lindsay, our associate pastor, who's helped shepherd this process all along. Then we have Alicia Ruby. She's one of our working group leaders. And Anjanette Hall and Jewel Williams were her partners, but the 3 of them decided that Alicia would be presenting today. So we thank all of them for what they've accomplished. And then Matt Ruby is presenting along with Walter Ginn, and they are from the sort of what I think of as the mission working group, and we'll hear from them as well. Then we have Raleigh, who has a few things to say from the group concerning the community and re-engaging the community. And also we have Gordon, who will be presenting today from Reconnecting the Church. And Gordon, you have a partner, but I don't think she's presenting today. Is that right?
Exactly. So Judy Steeler is not presenting today, but she was my co-leader.
I bet she's on, though. I haven't checked. So hello, Judy, and thank you to you too. So without further ado, I will let Greg say a few words about process. Oh, and one other person I should note, Arvid Whitmore, Reverend Arvid Whitmore, is our Committee on Ministry liaison in the Presbytery. And Arvid should be also with us today as well. So he's here. So thank you, Arvid, for being our liaison to Presbytery process all along. We appreciate you. Okay, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, so welcome everyone. It's been a great, interesting time this year together working with all of you. I remember being that weekend and we were like starting to do some of that training. A few of the people who were trained were on the computer and some were in the room, and it was announced before we got done that day that the church would have to go virtual, that things had been shut down. And it was quite a journey to watch people using, I think you were using an iPhone or an iPad to film that first service. And it was quite the experience. I know you've gone through some things with this year with COVID. You've had a couple staff members who've journeyed out of place with you, and you've had some challenges going forward, but it's been amazing to watch the resiliency of your team and to see how so many of you have participated in the process. Just a reminder, why we did this. You're in this interim period, and it used to be in many cases when we did an interim period, we kind of said, let's all just kind of quiet things down so that we can be almost at dead calm. So when the next minister comes in, he'll just generate so much enthusiasm and everything, and we'll move forward. And what we've learned is that it's much healthier for the incoming minister, and it's much healthier for the search process if a congregation has, in this interim period, begun to realize, what do we value most? Where is our energy going to be driving? What are we wanting to partner with to make something happen, which you have done so well through this time. Then when you look for that next minister, they're going to see a wave of enthusiasm and energy moving a certain way, And certain people will be attracted to the kinds of things you're doing and want to do and your values. And that will help you find a best match. And so I'm encouraged for what has happened. And now you'll be moving into the search and call process. And I think it's exciting to see where this is going. And let me say, nothing can be more amazing than trying to do all of this in the midst of COVID, but you have done it very well. And I'm encouraged for each of you. And so we're going to hear reports coming from each of the groups. And I think we're starting with Alicia. So Alicia, I'm going to turn it over to you. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alicia Ruby. My pronouns are she, her. It is a blessing to be with you all in this virtual format this morning. And before I get started, I just wanted to extend my Thanksgiving to my fellow group leaders and fellow group working members who have done just an amazing, amazing job in tackling this very weighty and big topic. I want to acknowledge and hold space that this topic is very big. We are the Embracing Diversity and Intentional Anti-Racism group. And so I just want to hold space and acknowledge all of the group members that have dug into this work so intentionally over the past 6 weeks. For those of you that might not know me, you might not know my face, you might not know my speaking voice, but you probably know my singing voice because I have been the alto soloist and section leader here at Fairmount for the past 9 years, which is very, very crazy to say. So this church has seen me through a graduate degree and a marriage and the birth of a son. And so I'm just so thankful for all of you. Before I get started and begin our presentation and share my screen, I just want to also acknowledge that this proposal that that I'm about to present is meant to be a working proposal, that there will be need for changes and evolution and growth, that this is not meant to be a be all end all. This is 9 of us making a recommendation that is well thought out and I think gets us on the right path. But I just want to acknowledge that this is an evolution and a process. Okay. I'm about to share my screen. If anyone can't see, if anybody is having technical issues, please put that in the chat so that the moderators can know, so that we can make sure that everybody is on the same page, so to speak. So here we go. Okay. So this is our working group members: Anjanette Hall, myself, Jewel Williams, Doris Evans, Jerry Geip, Nana Landgraf, Sally Mortimer, and Alice Weiner. So thank you to all of those. Oh, and Jack. Jack is not on this list, and we missed it until just now. So we want to acknowledge Jack as well. The goal of our group was the development of an action-oriented proposal for the work of anti-racism within Fairmount Presbyterian Church. I'm going to read these slides for those that might not be able to see the screen, those that might be joining just to listen. So bear with me as I read through these slides. This was the goal. And then we wanted to present you all with an overview of what was discussed within our group over the 6-week period. So we discussed that there is a need for confession and apology regarding historical and or present acts of racism within Fairmount Presbyterian Church. We discussed the need for action-oriented work, so the moving past and through performative action into direct action-oriented work. And we felt there is no need for ongoing study with regards to racism. Within our group, we shared personal stories related to our experiences with racism. We agreed that race is an artificial social construct. We discussed individual definitions of racism. We discussed what anti-racism work would look like at Fairmount Presbyterian Church. And we prioritized and cultivated a sense of community within our group. And so as we look towards what we are proposing, we wanted to also provide some initial context. Doris was able to share this quote from her sister, Dorothy, that racism is a disease that needs treatment every day. And so our context for our proposal and for the work that we did was that there is an urgency to this work, that this is work that cannot go on the back burner, that the work of anti-racism will be ongoing, that there is no definitive end point, there is no finish line, that this is work that will be ongoing, that our values and commitments surrounding this work will need to be part of the work of calling a new pastor. And our values and commitments surrounding this work will intersect with other aspects of church life. So there may be other aspects of life within the church where this work kind of come together and interweave. And so that gets to our proposal. And so I'm going to read through the items that we propose, and then there's a couple that we go into in a little bit more detail to give everybody that's participating in this summit a little bit more context about how we came to these decisions and what we think that might look like moving forward. So our proposal is that there is recognition that this anti-racism work should commence now and be ongoing. This group is proposing the formation of a standing group, quote unquote standing group. That doesn't have to be the official name. That's just what we have been calling it, within the church to continue this work. That there is individual/personal work that needs to be done to form the collective culture of the standing group within the church. And we're going to go into that on the next slide and speak to that specifically in just a moment. We're proposing acknowledgement of past and present harm, and then an apology for that harm. We are proposing commitment to the work of anti-racism to repair past harm and or prevent future harm. And we are proposing the critical examination and active dismantling of systems, structures, policies, procedures, and ideologies that have perpetuated racism within Fairmount Presbyterian Church. Those are the 6 pillars of our proposal, and I'm going to go into just a couple of these in a little bit more detail. And the first one that I want to speak to, and that the group wanted spoken to, was this idea of individual and personal work. And so why and what that might look like. So it was identified by the group as part of, or even a prerequisite for, the standing group. So this is work that would happen either in conjunction or before the formation of that standing group. And the reason why that was identified is that the goal of that work would be to bring awareness to the topic, to establish individual personal commitments and values as it relates to anti-racism, to develop a shared language, to cultivate community-centered, to cultivate community centered around anti-racism work. That there would be ongoing multiple opportunities for members, that this would be something that we call people in to do to build this coalition of the work. Initially, we identified that this is work for the white people. This is work for those of us who benefit from white privilege. And another reason that we thought through that is because without this shared language, without this awareness and this community that has been cultivated, to do this work, for as white people, there may be harm that is caused to our BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, People of Color. That's what that acronym means. There may be harm that comes to those members. There also is the emotional labor of those members to be in a space with people who benefit from white privilege, who are doing this individual personal work. So we want to make sure that we're cognizant of that as we go through this initial process. There may also be, as part of this individual personal work, a space for those BIPOC members. And how that work takes form, we are not making a recommendation. We felt that this would be best if there was ongoing discussion about what that work looks like, in collaboration and conjunction with the leadership and those that might have opinions on how this would fit best within the life of Fairmount. But it may be book discussion or discussions over a period of time. There may be an initial cohort led by a trained facilitator that would work through this process, and then thereby training those that are part of that initial cohort, and then that cohort could go and present to the larger community and continue to call people in. So that we're not necessarily proposing how that takes shape. After or with this individual personal work, there would be the formation of the standing group within the church, that committee or a task force comprised of individuals from the cohort that's done the individual personal work and our BIPOC members. Again, that acronym is Black, Indigenous, People of Color. We need to be centering our BIPOC members' voices, especially and intentionally where decisions are being made. What work might that committee do? The critical examination and active dismantling of systems, structures, policies, procedures, and ideologies that have perpetuated racism within Fairmount. So this idea of looking into critically, essentially every aspect of church life, and looking for things that have perpetuated racism and continue to perpetuate racism, and then work towards the active dismantling of that. The group may investigate the intersectionality of this work with other aspects of church life, things like ableism, things like gender identity or sexual orientation, things like socioeconomic status. Those are things that may come up where there's an intersectionality of this work. This standing group would be responsible for constant evaluation, right? So in this idea of this being ongoing work, there is constant and consistent evaluation of the group itself, what that group is doing and how that group is doing it, and also the aspects of life within Fairmount. They would have profound sensitivity to identify areas for growth within the church, so part of that constant evaluation. And there would, again, be this ongoing decision-making, adapting, changing, and growing. The life of the church will change, the people in the group may change, the goals of the group may change, and so there will need to be flexibility in decision-making and being able to adapt and change and grow for the needs of the group, for the needs of the organization, for the needs of the church, for the needs of our community, for the needs of our world. I did want to include what the work that the leadership of Fairmount is doing. So they're beginning a anti-racism and mental decolonization coursework for the staff to begin January 12th. It's a 28-day immersive experience designed to provide a foundation for the lifelong work of mental decolonization. And that's social identities for beginners. And then the William Burkett Williams speaker on May 23rd at 4, which is in cooperation with St. Paul's and Plymouth Church, Austin Channing Brown will be speaking as well. So exciting work coming up for the leadership. We did also include in our slide, and we will, I think, I didn't have this approved, so I don't know, but we can probably share this presentation with people so that we have access, so that you all have access to these resources. These are resources that were talked about within our group by various group members. For those of you that are interested in kind of, just really excited based on this presentation to get to work, here's a list of some places where you can start. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. James Baldwin said, and may it be so. And so with that, I turn it back over to other panelists. I'm not sure if we're doing questions now. I don't know.
Yeah, I would think we ought to just do questions for your group now, rather than try to wait. So if you have questions of Alicia, please put them in the Q&A or in the chat, and Christine will monitor them and ask them. And
I think you saw the comments from Elaine about what's happening in Cleveland Heights. So that's been put up there. And yes, Jesse, we are going to be putting these resources on our website. So everybody will be able to see all the presentations.
Thank you, Elaine.
Awesome work. Thank you from Gina. From Christina, we are excited to see these conversations come in to serve council mission work moving forward. Great work, Alicia and team, from Denise Benton.
okay, well, I think that if you have other things, you could probably put them in and we'll get to them later, but let's move on to our next presentation. Is it Matt and Walter going next? I believe, Jesse, is that what you told me? We're going that way. So Matt and Walter, you're on.
Okay. Well, I'll start out. First of all, ours is the mission working group. So we also have something that's near and dear to many members' hearts to focus on. And I want to thank our working group, which included Brenda Horton, Ren Phoebe, Hetty Westra, Christina Seekley, Keith Mills, Maren Hunter, Matt Ruby, Gene Silak, and Peter Scheid. So really, probably if you look at that group, you probably got about 200 years of membership and commitment to Fairmount Presbyterian Church within that group of 9 or 10 individuals. Matt, if it's okay with you, why don't you start with the Matthew 25? We actually have 3 proposals. However, we don't have a PowerPoint presentation. So, and I understand from Christine that our actual proposals will be on the Fairmount Presbyterian Church website. So Matt, are you ready to do the Matthew 25, and then I'll do the food insecurity, and then you could finish up with the communications? Is that okay?
That is fine. A couple prefaces. One, if you hear that, I apologize. My Alicia and I's toddler is in the room with me, and we're just gonna power through. Second, I don't relish going after my wife, but here we are. So I'm going to start out by saying generally, engagement is one of the hardest things. Communicating with people, getting them involved. I'm sorry. I have to.
excuse us, everybody. You know what? We're gonna switch places because I'm done and I'm in the quiet office so that Matt can really focus on this. I apologize. So if you will just give us 30 seconds to make that switch. Walter, I don't know if you want to talk, but let the Rubies make a switch.
Yeah, and no apologies needed.
So we'll shift as Matt's shifting. Why don't I then jump over and do the food insecurity proposal, and then by then Matt should be in his new spot. Okay. We're not muted. So if you hear some background noise, you might recognize it as the neighborhood leaf blowers. So I apologize ahead of time for that. So the first of our proposals deals with food insecurity, and how we got there. There were a number of ideas that sort of shaped our proposal. The first is that we want to support initiatives that are local in nature, and when I mean local, particularly the Heights area. And we know that food insecurity is a local issue, a very significant local issue, as well as being a national issue and a national problem. We have the wonderful fortune to have a very exciting youth population within our church who developed a very successful little free pantry. And if you haven't seen it, if you haven't been by it, please take some time to, when you're in the neighborhood, to stop by and look at it and see all of the things that are in the little food pantry. Already the little food pantry, which I think has been in place since the spring, engages a broad cross section of the congregation, which is also very important to us as we think about mission. And finally, it's sitting right there, the little food free pantry. I keep jumping back and forth, is a very visible mission undertaking. It doesn't sort of sit over there someplace. It's right in front of us every day that we come to church. So while a core component of what we're thinking about in responding to the issues of food insecurity is building on the little free pantry, the issue of food insecurity is much greater than what we can just do, what the little free pantry can address. So what we want to accomplish has several legs, and in fact incorporates things that we were already doing through a variety of ministries at Fairmount and with some very discrete activities. So this particular legs of our proposal are to help fund institutions in the Cleveland area, which are all about getting food to those in greatest need. The second leg is to maintain and expand the little free pantry on the church property, and that we've already seen very significant use already. But also think about, would it make sense to add one or two little free pantries in the Heights area? And maybe doing that in conjunction with, or in cooperation or partnership with another church or another community group in Cleveland Heights or in our general vicinity. We want to, as part of our proposal, we want to investigate and join with efforts to alleviate food deserts in greater Cleveland. And finally, as part of our desire for education, is to educate the broader congregation on issues of why in food insecurity is very important, and what as citizens as well as members of Fairmount Presbyterian Church we can do to alleviate or mitigate the issues of food insecurity. One of the things that we really like about this proposal is that it will include many partners, but many of these groups are already partners of us. So certainly, the food bank, the work that we do at Lutheran Metropolitan Ministries, the Hunger Network, and the local network of Presbyterian churches, as well as other churches in the community. And then another partnership is all of the individuals working on the little free pantry. Our timetable is pretty simple. What we are proposing is that as a starting point is that the groups that have been most actively involved with the little free pantry will get together with Serve Council and talk about a rollout strategy, a time strategy. And then with that, you're really communicating with the congregation, engaging the congregation and what is the plan for implementation, as well as the rollout schedule. So with that, that's what I've got on food insecurity, and hopefully Matt is now in his new place and can talk about our wonderful proposal around becoming a Matthew 25 church.
Yes,
Yeah,
I am back. Walter, thank you for covering for me, everybody. I apologize for that, what that was. So as I was starting to say, engagement is one of the hardest things. And that's a very broad, sweeping statement, because it doesn't really matter what it's talking about, but getting people to believe in something and to buy into something and to give of themselves, whether that's their time, their energy, their money, whatever it is extremely challenging. Living in a global health pandemic only makes that more challenging to do. So when this working group got together, the proposal that Walter just gave to you is one specific example of building upon a successful program that the church has already been doing, and really scaling that up to benefit more people, and to start raising some excitement within the working group. We did go. We had multiple discussions, also not just about the what, but the how, and the idea of how do we get our congregation members. I think the word for the title of this group is catalyst. So how do we catalyze people and get them re-engaged, especially in a time where we're all tired. We're tired all the time. My wife commonly says to me, living in this pandemic, we just have to give ourselves a little grace. So the expectation that everybody will do what they can, when they can, how they can, because at the end of the day, we just got to get through the day, and we all have obligations to our families and our jobs, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So as we were talking through this, one of the ideas to raise this excitement, to become more unified as an institution in the mission work that we're doing, was to brand it. When that idea was thrown out there, we weren't necessarily talking about Matthew 25, which I'll get to in just a moment. Just the general idea of taking all the various projects and the various things that we're doing and uniting them under one flag, and presenting that both internally as this is who we are, this is where we're going, this is what we do, but also externally. And how do we portray ourselves to Cleveland Heights, to Greater Cleveland, as this is where our focus is, and this is how we want to partner and better our community. So Matthew 25, ironically, was thrown out just as an example, but a lot of the members, all of the members of the working group really latched onto this and started digging into it, finding out more what it was. And I figured it would be best, if everybody on this call will recall, we had the Reverend Diane Moffat come speak at Fairmount, what seems like a million years ago before we were all stuck at home. But she was here and it was great. And she spoke about Matthew 25 and the basic principles of it. So I found the really short, it's like 3 minutes video that she presented. And I'm going to show that really fast so that we are all speaking the same terminology. And hopefully this works.
Matthew 25 calls us to actively engage in the world around us. Hello, I am Diane Moffat, Executive Director and President of the Presbyterian Mission Agency. Matthew 25 provides a sound biblical and theological basis for the Presbyterian Mission Agency's focus for 2019-2020. That focus is threefold. 1, building congregational vitality. 2, dismantling structural racism. And 3, eradicating systemic poverty. I want to share with you our bold vision and invitation to all mid-councils and churches of the Presbyterian Church USA to become a Matthew 25 church. You can help our denomination become a more relevant presence in the world. Matthew 25 will help us to connect and unite the PCUSA, creating a spark that energizes and joins us all in our common mission together. It will help us to celebrate and call forth churches that actively engage the world and help us to see and understand who we are as Presbyterian Christians. We are saved to serve. The Matthew 25 invitation focuses on verses 31 to 46, the parable of the sheep and goats, in which Jesus makes clear that what we do to the least of these matters to God. The principle of Matthew 25 is active engagement in your community, in your congregation, in our world. We must put feet to faith, hands to hope, and legs to love. Matthew 25 is a living translation of Jesus Christ, strengthening relationships, transforming our church, and bringing alive our commitment to serve God's people in our community and around the world. So, how do you become a Matthew 25 church? It's easy. Go to the website, pcusa.org/Matthew 25, and sign up your congregation to become a Matthew 25 church. You can select one or more of the 3 focuses to embrace in your community, or maybe you are already doing work around building congregational vitality, or dismantling structural racism, or eradicating systemic poverty. As you live out your faith and your commitment to Matthew 25, we ask you to share the impact that your pledge has made, how your congregation has changed, how you've discovered new passions and vitality, how your members have been re-energized as disciples. You can submit your impact stories on the website. There are already PCUSA congregations that identify themselves as Matthew 25 churches. We aim to help multiply this loving commitment to radical and fearless discipleship by partnering with mid-councils and congregations. If you want to know more about this vision to act boldly and compassionately, serving people who are hungry, oppressed, imprisoned, or poor, please visit our website, pcusa.org/Matthew 25.
All right. So I would like to thank Reverend Moffat for sharing. So that's the big story, the overarching story on what Matthew 25 is. I really want to talk. Oh, and I should say outright, the recommendation of the working group is to join on and become a Matthew 25 church. So from our perspective, obviously doing so would tie us into the larger network of the PCUSA and the other congregations, some of whom are local, have already done that. But elegance or the poeticness of Matthew 25 at this particular time for us is it also does a really great job of tying together the things that we're already doing and a lot of the themes that are coming out of this summit right now. We talked within the working group that we don't want to disregard, for lack of a better word, the existing ministries and things that the church is already doing as we move forward. But we need a lens, I guess is the good word, is the best word. So if you'll recall, Serve Council, my sense of timing is way off. So at some point in the last couple of years, did a listening project, and the 3 foci that came out of that to guide the church were youth, education, and poverty. Now, there is obvious alignment there between those 3 foci and the pillars of Matthew 25, specifically the poverty piece. And Lindsay just put something in the chat, so go ahead and make sure to read that because she would be much more of an expert on the listening project than I would be. But also, the second pillar, even though we were focused on the mission work, the secondary pillar of combating systemic racism and everything my wife was just talking about in the previous presentation. And on top of that, the third pillar of congregational vitality of all these, again, different pieces that we're doing, building us up is sort of the natural byproduct of this work. So we feel very, very strongly that if we adopt the Matthew 25 brand as our identity, especially when it comes to our mission work, that it would help unify us all and really kind of reinvigorate is the word. I actually even think that's on the PCUSA website, is to reinvigorate our efforts and help guide us forward. Checking out the actual proposal to see if I missed anything. Are these actual proposals going to be available online, like the actual documents? I'm looking for Jesse, Lindsay, are these going to be available online?
I believe Christine said that they'll be posted online. Yes.
Okay, because then I'm not necessarily going to go into every
No,
bullet
you
point.
don't need to.
No.
Thank
Okay,
you.
perfect.
What we can do is post the recording of this video with the documents.
Okay, perfect. Yes, so that's the broad stroke of that particular proposal. Our third proposal is having to do again with process and the how. So we would become a Matthew 25 if it's the will of the congregation. We would become a Matthew 25 church. How would we actually get that done? How would we take this idea, take this brand, take this new identity, and really kind of help distribute it amongst congregation members? How do we distribute it and communicate it outside of the walls of our church? So we had a lot of discussion within the working group about the importance and the need for a paid non-volunteer, a paid non-volunteer director of communications position, title pending. It doesn't have to be that, but something along the lines of somebody who is charged with shepherding the communication strategy, both internal and external, around our mission work, and is responsible for getting all those helping get the word out there on that. Doing so would establish a single point of contact who would be responsible for not only creating but managing this strategy. And the results would be a more informed congregation, but also a more informed community about that we're a ready and willing partner. This is very much, we feel very strongly that this communication need exceeds the capacity of any one or single or any one or group of volunteers within the church. Within, like, for example, like Serve Council, there needs to be somebody that is being paid that has the expectations of following, of doing this work and moving forward. Because if we some of the members of the working group who have a longer history with Fairmount were concerned that going this route and adopting this brand would be a false start, because if we don't double down and put our resources behind it and really push forward that this is the direction that we want to go. This is who Fairmount, this is who we are and who we want to become, that it would just sort of fizzle away, and nobody wants that. So the actual proposal has some more details, some more resources and such on how to get that done. But I think the last point of importance is, while we were focused again specifically on the mission work, this communications position, there's advantages for all the other working groups, all the councils, session, the staff, of really having this person who is tackling this issue, and because communicating with people, just like engaging with people, because I think those are synonymous terms, is one of the hardest things to do. And I think it demonstrates our willingness and our desire to go in this direction. The end.
And do you have one more proposal? Okay, let's move on to Gordon.
Actually, we have 3 questions in the Q&A, and they're for various people. Can I read those?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so the first question is in regards to hunger. Nationally, 1/3 of children are hungry. Do we know what the percentage is for Cleveland Heights?
No, but that's something that we should be able to find out, and we will try to get that information and post it on the website.
Okay, great. The second question is for
Hold
Elise.
on, I think Raleigh might have an answer.
Yeah. So before the pandemic, it was 1 in 6 kids in the greater Cleveland area, and it was heightened locally in Cleveland Heights. And you can look at sort of the number of people in Cleveland Heights who get SNP, who get WIC and SNAP, and qualify for free and reduced price lunches. So what we know is it's actually much larger in Cleveland Heights, but I would say that take 1 in 6 is the basic number and double it, because that's what we're seeing nationally and in a lot of different verticals where economic tension was hard before the pandemic, but that economic stress is only compounded. Every vertical that I have worked in recently, and I work with an organization that focuses a lot on food insecurity, we're seeing that it's just like multiplied by 200%, and that we're just beginning to see those numbers roll in, because the way that we look at the data for food insecurity, we're going to essentially have to see another whole tax year and another school year come around before we get that data. So I would say it's very reasonable to say that more than 1 in 5, if not closer to 1 in 3 kids in the Cleveland Heights area specifically are currently right now hungry.
And some of you may have seen on the national news this week that there are 12 million families that will lose unemployment benefits after Christmas if nothing changes in terms of our national thing.
I want to interject at that point, because Riley brings up a really good point that I neglected to mention. So the working group, we really tried to stay focused on sort of the immediate, kind of answering the question of, how do we re-engage people? There is a ton of work left to do. And it was really valuable having several members of Serve Council serving on this working group, because largely we suspect that it's going to be that council that's going to be carrying this work on their shoulders to move forward. So one of the other advantages of going with a Matthew 25 and becoming a Matthew 25 church is not only does it give us that framework to work within, but it also gives us license to be more intentional about the ministries that we are investing our time, energy, and resources in, because everything is finite. So instead of having all these, nobody is proposing eliminating anything that we're already doing, but going forward, having specific elements and things that, here's the criteria for whether the church would support as an institution and all that work, but that's going to largely be Serve Council moving into the future.
And the one thing I would add is that as I mentioned when I was presenting the proposal, it's not the issue of addressing food insecurity in the Heights or in the broader greater Cleveland community is something that requires a multitude of different efforts, and some of which we are already a part of, and we can really build on, from the little free pantry to the work that we do with the Hunger Network and with the food bank and so on. So it's certainly in the present. And as Matt said, there's a lot of work for us to do. And so we, among other things, we need to educate ourselves as to what we can do, because it's an institutional effort. It's also an individual effort. Thanks, Matt. In Raleigh.
Okay, I think that's it. We can continue.
Greg, I'm not sure. Am I
We lost
seeing you
Greg.
still?
Looks like Greg dropped off.
Okay, so while he gets back on, I think we're going to have the next group go ahead. So Gordon.
Great. So try to get the slideshow up here. There we go. And we will try to reshare over to the slideshow as opposed to bear with me. Okay, so that's the slideshow. We were re-engaging the church. As you can see from the background, this is a photo that Jim Dakin took when he was studying LEDs for the church. So thank you very much to Jim Dakin. Our proposal was to look at strategies to re-engage the church. Our team was Chin-Tai Kim, who brought to the conversation a very deep philosophy and thought about the role of the pastor in the church and how we need to continually look to the pastor for theological leadership. Joyce Pope brought to us some really great ideas. Megan Bennett brought to us some ideas about pastor involvement. Gina brought forth a really wonderful idea on shepherding that we'll explore in a few minutes, and Brian Seekley. Judy was the co-leader, and really wonderful group. This really was kind of the spearhead of re-engaging the church. We've our mission statement was that we're here to fertilize new connections, to re-engage all members by reaching out to those recently inactive, active members through small groups of Christian education. We want to encourage discourse about the theological, social, and ethical issues, and really enliven the church's religious lives. So our proposal has 4 parts to it. The first, Guess Who's Calling, is a thing that Forest Hills Presbyterian Church has been doing, and Joyce identified this and brought this to us. Shepherding, Gina identified this as another congregation has been doing with great success. And then education topics, bringing adult education immediately into the church life during the pandemic, and then various topics that can extend into when we get back in person. And then Stephen Ministers is a program that we had done for many years, had fallen away, and we would very much like to rekindle it. Our vision is structured communication activities that will energize Fairmont members, bring in members of the community to speak more freely in a time when we've been robbed of access to our church. We have to social distance, we have to wear masks, and we fear. And who was it, Churchill, who said fear is the worst fear. So we need to get back into this. The impact of Guess Who's Calling will be to connect one starting goal of 100 members, but we could work that up. The shepherding would develop, we need to develop the structure and identify the shepherds, train the shepherds, assign the flocks, and then this would, the shepherding, as we'll see in a few minutes, will get the church, everyone in the church engaged. Education topics would be, in addition to the current online worship and prayer meetings, ways for groups to get together online and talk about theology. And then the Stephen ministry would reboot a lay-led pastoral care component. It doesn't replace the pastoral care, but really is a very robust program of getting members of the congregation assisting other members. The partners in Guess Who's Calling and shepherding would be deacons, and we would get the deacons to help coordinate and then draw in from the volunteer group of the congregation. The discussion groups and the Stephen ministers would also draw from the congregation. We did identify specific costs of these programs, pretty minimal. We've already identified that the budget already had some Stephen ministry money available, so we're really excited that that is already available. So we're not really drawing, we're not adding a great number here to the church budget. So the resources really for the Guess Who's Calling and the Shepherd program would be looking at what is, get Pastor Lindsay, and maybe this would redefine part of her role. So also that would, the Stephen ministry would also perhaps fall on Pastor Lindsay. The timetable, the Guess Who's Calling and the discussion prayer groups can be started upon approval by session. The Shepherd program would require a little bit of coordination and shepherd selection, and it would take 1 to 3 months to get going. Stephen ministry is going to take a little bit longer because we have to identify another leader. The leaders actually train the ministers, and we do have 7 ministers in the congregation, but we have to identify whether they are willing to re-engage in Stephen ministry, and if not, identify and train more leaders. So that could take 9 to 12 months before that's ready to go. So that's my presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
No, right now I currently do not see any questions in the Q&A.
We will have a much more detailed description of these programs on the website.
Thank you, Gordon. And Raleigh, I think you are you get we saved the best for last. So
I'm not going to say anything you haven't heard me say before, and even other people say before. Hi, I don't have a fancy presentation for you, so I'm just going to read to you from some notes. I'm Raleigh, for those of you who don't know me, and I am here representing re-engaging the community, and I think that I just want to say that re-engaging the community is a very big and bold ask, and it's almost so wide that you could wonder, what does that mean? And even when it came time to naming this specific working group, we struggled. And that's because there's really nothing small or working about this group, but a really very major functional component of any nonprofit and even any for-profit organization. We're trying to fit all of that into a narrow bucket. And quite frankly, everything else we've talked about here today, from anti-racism to shepherding and Stephen ministers to food insecurity, everything we do at the church, all of those are components that could be part of this group, because this group in a lot of ways isn't about the doing, it's about the talking about the doing. And I think that Matt really hit that on the head. The success of all that we do here at Fairmount relies on professional communication competence. And that's really what I'm going to talk to you about today. I also, and I apologize, I have asthma and I'm in this like season of the year where I struggle to breathe. So don't be concerned if I sound like I'm struggling to breathe, it's okay. But I want to make sure that I specifically highlight John Zitzner and Elaine Price, who stayed committed to this imperative and leveraged both their personal experience and brain power by email, in Zooms, all the things. Thank you so much, both of you. But so re-engaging the community really does speak to this broader issue. And there is a community that needs to be re-engaged, right? So one that currently isn't engaged, and moreover, that we haven't even developed a targeted name for what that community is and who that is. So in our first working group, we nailed down some really specific issues. That Fairmount community isn't just the community inside our church doors or outside our church doors. It's this, in the digital era in particular, it's this broader sense of community. So it's the Fairmounters, in this case specifically for re-engaging the community, it's the Fairmounters who come but don't necessarily self-identify as Fairmounters, don't walk into a room for a community meeting and say, hey, I'm here from Fairmount Presbyterian Church. But they're also not the people that show up like all of you have at a virtual summit. They're not in the pews on Sundays or in the feeds on Facebook and YouTube, but they are people that we see in our church. We see them at Easter, we see them at Christmas. They are the people outside of our church doors and in our broader community. And Elaine, I think, really beautifully nailed down that broader community, the people in our neighborhood, in the Heights, in Greater Cleveland and beyond. But I think that regardless of who we're talking to, we've also nailed down some specific and immediate communication needs. Leading into Advent and the activity going up to Christmas, I mean, communicating that effectively is a theological and religious imperative, and it's also just really important for the life of our organization that we do that well. And in the short term, we knew that was going to sort of be the immediate goal. How do we tell Fairmounters who do self-identify, who do show up in virtual Sundays, who show up on, you know, any random Sunday in the middle of February despite a snowstorm in the church, like that group of people, how do we tell them what's going on for the holiday season and get them excited and get them engaged? And then how do we make sure that they're telling everybody that they used to tell, who would come on Christmas, who would come on Easter, who would talk about, oh, look at what Fairmount Church is doing. Did you see what they have outside their doors now? Did you see that sign? We need to be able to figure out how to pivot from these classic modes of communication that we've always relied on into a much more competent professional mode of communication that translates into virtual and digital and the needs of the modern era. So in the long term, we have this need for a broader communication strategy. And I will say that when I first rejoined Fairmount as an adult, because I grew up in this church and then moved away, when I said to Derek, how can I get engaged? What can I do? How can I bring my skills to bear for our church community and the life of Fairmount? He told me there's this thing that happens with volunteerism and professionals. And he said that he finds that when you bring in professionals as volunteers, that it creates a friction and that you don't leverage the people's professional experience. You let them engage in a different way in a volunteerism. And I'm just here to break that all apart. So I've been working in communications for nearly 20 years. I've worked in advertising, I've worked in marketing, I've worked in social media, I've worked in public relations. I'm doing it large for-profits, small nonprofits, and right now I do it for a lobby and advocacy group in DC. And we're seeing the same problems that Fairmount is. And that's true, I think, across all organizations of all different types. Right now, we are in this very different means of communicating with the organizations in our lives and the people in our lives and the people beyond those sort of normal modes, the re-engaging the community people who aren't just the people you pick up the phone and call or text. These verticals, sort of advertising, marketing, PR, social, they used to be considered really distinct and different things. And they would even be in different corners or floors in an office building, working on different projects with different leads. But in our modern digital environment, these are essentially all the same undertaking. And today's exclusively virtual environment, they're now really one and the same. Successful communications of any variety requires one cohesive strategy that works across all of these verticals all of the time. And Fairmount needed a really clear communication strategy, not something sort of siloed across social media updates and a newsletter and Friday emails and our, like, the ways that deacons talk to each other. We didn't have like one core messaging that we were all sharing across all of these nodes. And while we were able to get by on that for a while, it became clear when we had to pivot to this like exclusively virtual environment that there was this greater need for what our sort of long-term strategy is and our short-term communication strategy. I think that we have all seen that play out in the last few months, and I think that this is like a normal moment where every organization says at some point we need to reinvest in our communication strategy and what that looks like. And I think that with my professional hat on, that is the moment we're in. But so no matter who I've spoken to about this, and John and Elaine are really great resources in that, I've heard a couple of the same questions. Who are we talking to? What do we want to tell them? And what do we want them to do with that information? And that is really actually the building block of any communication strategy. That is what your strategy answers. There were also some clear motifs that became apparent in what those communications needed to be and what they need to focus on. So consistently, we hear people say that they miss the building, and the building needs to be part of their communications with the church. Even when they cannot go to the building's importance is clear. That physical church home matters. And we also have heard really consistently about all of the components of the music ministry and how that is something that draws people in, keeps them tethered to Fairmount, and keeps Fairmount alive in their hearts, even when they're not in the building. And I want to shout out John here, who dug up all of his Fairmount choir CDs to share with Conrad to help bring that full life of Fairmount's musical history back into our current digital era. And in a moment where we're all looking at Facebook and looking at YouTube and wondering what's working, what's not working, what's translating to digital, music is translating beautifully to digital. And investing in that as a data-backed, clear communication strategy is a point that we can actually activate on quickly. Oh, hello, girls. Do you want to say hi? Hi. Hi. And Woodsy's saying hi. Hi, everybody. Okay, ladies, give me just a few minutes. Oh, I'm so glad Daddy made you Gatorade. The life of the church, everybody. But so all of these things together, we have a lot of work to do. Like, all of this is a lot of work. For the short term, we have a holiday campaign that means effectively telling everybody that we want to tell. Who are all those people? That's a lot of different nodes again, right? Like inside the church, outside the church, in the city of Cleveland, in Cleveland Heights. What we're doing at Advent, what to be excited about at the end of this dark, long journey we are all on our own roads to Bethlehem through the pandemic. There's a miracle at the other end of that. But how we communicate that, like that's a strategy. And that's not one that is just a working group or a volunteer-based strategy. Even in the long term, we have these major communication strategies and action items to address. And again, that requires a beautiful investment and a consistent investment and a professional investment. And the message of Jesus is pretty clear, right? We all have this book we share. We have, I give my kids version, but we have a playbook for how we're supposed to go talk about Jesus and what we're supposed to do. As Christians, we become agents for the physical playbook. Fairmount now needs to figure out what our playbook is. And this is where I'm going to take off my Fairmount hat and put back on my comms professional hat. We need to do that with a communications professional. I say that as a communications professional. We need to invest in the way we tell our story, who we are telling our story to, what that story is, and what we want them to do with that story. We need somebody who can answer all of these big questions, get buy-in from all of the people in this room, all of the different groups and demographics and entities inside of our church. And we need somebody who can tell the stories of all the great ideas brought here today, who can capture them, translate them, and use our various modes of communication that we already have that are pre-existing to do that effectively and envision the new ones. These questions cannot be answered in a short-term working group. They're big questions that require a professional to develop and own and get the buy-in and be responsible for the success, the failure, pivoting, growing, all of the things that we all do in our professional lives all of the time. But to do that is a communications person. I would say that look at the investments we've made, right? Look at the people that we have invested in as the community of Fairmount, the staff that we have, our pastoral staff, our church staff. We've invested in wonderful people. We don't ask them to show up and just do it as a volunteer a couple hours a week. We say, we know that this is something that matters. This work really, really matters. And I think that while we lean on professionals to empower and take action in those areas, the physical caretaking, our spiritual caretaking, we need to now sort of have our own come to Jesus moment and do the same thing for the communications of the church. We need to take it seriously and invest in it. And the last thing I'll say is that our working group isn't done. We've asked to extend our working group time, or rather it has been offered that we should extend our working group time. And I would tell you that what we really need to do is take somebody from each of these different groups and session and deacons and the councils and stand up a working group for communications until we get somebody in the door who can really own this. We've got to figure out how to get all these verticals, bring them in, and find the ways that we can champion some of these ideas in the short term. Even if we were to hire somebody in 2 weeks, that's still 2 weeks of communications that we need to be concerned about. So there's my spiel.
Very good. Thank you. So you've heard all of the various teams, and I'm so appreciative of the work they did. You know, I've worked with different churches around this. You had some really bright, energetic, you know, enthusiastic, you know, people who brought from their professional lives, their personal lives into all of this. And the key is not to simply say, oh, this was nice, let's thank you for your report and we'll just move on. You really have to incorporate into where you're going forward what has come out of this work. And so I challenge those who are on session and those who are in the deacons to take these ideas, work with people, add some of these folks, if they're not already in some of your working teams, add them into your leadership so that they're involved in this process moving forward. And again, this is going to be helpful in the process of you moving toward your next pastor. So take all these things to heart and move them forward. I'll look forward to a report back in 6 months and hear how many good things you've done. So Jesse, you'll keep me abreast of that. So Jesse, any final words from you? And then I know Liz is going to close this in prayer.
We'll have a survey going out, right, Christine, after today, where you can make known your feelings on timing about these proposals. And thank you, everyone, for being here today and for giving us so much to think about. Lindsay, I think you're going to do the closing prayer.
Absolutely. Please, please, please complete that survey when you get it, because we don't know how you feel. We can't even see you. So we don't have those visual cues even. So please complete that survey. It will only take you, what, a minute or two. It's pretty quick. So thank you all for being here this morning. Thank you to all the working groups for all the work you've done and all the work that's led up to this moment. Thank you for giving us some time on your Saturday morning, and let us close in prayer. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks for your Spirit, which is clearly moving in and through this community. We pray, God, that you would help us in this moment of discernment to hear what you are calling us to do, who you're calling us to be, how you're calling us to walk forward through this pandemic to Bethlehem and to the miracle that awaits. God, we pray that you will continue to bless and to guide us. Help us to know that you are near through all that we are going through, and give us visions of the future and who you are calling us to be. We give you thanks for all of that and for so much more. And we pray all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. God bless you all. Go in peace.